So have you ever wondered when you were outsourcing or maybe just going through your closet looking at your older items that you have, whether or not a pair of your Levi's or a pair you're picking up are actually vintage? Well, if so, then I think today could be your lucky day, because we're going to be examining some really important factors to consider and look for to help us be able to figure out whether or not a pair of Levi's is vintage and start the process of narrowing down maybe just how old they are. Now, a couple of things I want to point out before we get started. Number one, this is not a comprehensive guide. I'm giving you kind of an overview. I'm hoping to give you a foundation to build upon if you don't have that already, or maybe you'll find a couple of things in this if you've already started that you didn't already know. Number two, we're going to be focusing primarily upon Levi's that were made in the 70s and 80s and 90s, because that's what you're going to find mostly when you're out there. Now always understand this, that whether or not something is worth picking up is always based on what it's priced at. If you're out there trying to buy to resell, it's a lot different than if you're out there trying to buy it because you're going to use it. So keep that in mind. I'm by no means saying because you identified as vintage, buy it no matter what, it's worth a fortune. That is not the point. You still have to consider the sell-through rate. You still have to consider the buy cost versus the potential market value of the item. All right. All right, so now we got all that out of the way. Let me remind you, my name is Josh. This is Bama Jaybird Resell. Thank you so much for joining me today on the channel. And with that being said, I do want to get right on into the topic and start looking at these three factors that we're going to be considering as we begin to evaluate whether or not a particular pair of Levi's is vintage. All right, so the first thing that I would say you should look at is the material. So number one, older Levi's are going to be 100% cotton. They're not going to be a blended fabric. All of your newer models have some kind of blend to them for the most part. There may be some exceptions. But for the most part, they're a blended fabric. They include some ability to stretch like most modern jeans do. The fabric is much lighter than the older Levi's. And as you source for vintage denim, you will find that vintage denim just has a different feel. It doesn't matter if it's Levi's, Wranglers, Lee's, whatever it is you're picking up, things that were made in the United States. You can even get into, vintage polo or vintage Calvin Klein, whatever it is. If it's vintage enough, if it's like, 80s, especially and before, you will notice a heavier weight to the fabric. Even if it's broken in, it's got a heavier weight to it and a different feel. So keep that in mind. The material is always something to pay attention to. It's kind of a first step, noticing and being able to kind of know the feel. And you can always look at the tag inside of it where it tells you what it's made of to help you with that until you understand it better. Now, another thing that you want to pay attention for is selvage denim. So selvage denim was used up into the early mid 80s. I think it's like 83 or 84. And selvage denim is a special kind of denim. I'll show you a picture right here. And so you're going to look at the outseam when you turn the leg inside out, and you will see this looks very different, right? So a selvage denim had a finished edge on it that prevented the fabric from unraveling. And all of the older vintage denim, especially Levi's, again, early mid 80s and back, were made using selvage denim. Now this came out of a place called Cone Mills. It was based out of Greensboro, North Carolina, although they did have, I think, some operations in a few other states. The main one was in Greensboro, and it was the last one that closed down. And so it closed down in 2017, but even before it closed down, they had already changed their manufacturing process where they no longer made selvage denim. You see, the old selvage denim, and this is the history teacher coming out in me from 18 years, right? In the classroom, textiles were the first major industry, right? Big time industry to pop up with the invention of water powered looms and the flying shuttle and the spinning jenny, all these different technological advancements, and especially in the United Kingdom, or in Great Britain as it was known at the time. And so that was part of the early industrial revolution. And so as the making of cotton fabric and eventually denim, right? We could go into the history of that. The name traces back to a place in France. The word jeans that we use traces back to Genoa, jeans, gin. And so that's where that comes from. You're probably not interested in that, so we'll move on. But I just want to throw that in there. So White Oak Mills, up until the early mid-80s, though, they did make selvage denim. And after that, they changed their machines from the older machines using the flying shuttle that made a kind of hardier, heavier fabric, and they changed into this where it made a much broader, much wider, and it was much faster. And so that part was good. It was still cotton. It was still 100% cotton, but it wasn't the same style of cotton. It had a distinctly different look It wasn't quite as heavy, it wasn't quite as durable, but still more so than today. Anyway, it closed in 2017, and well before that, Levi's had stopped using it as their primary source of denim, of course. Now, so basically it's like this. If you see selvage seams on the inside of the leg, then you're looking at a pair of Levi's that was made before 1985. That means that they're going to be at least 40 years old or older. And those are often more sought after. Selvage denim, because it's the trademark of the historical Levi's for those decades, right? For decades, it was the standard. And so anytime you find a pair that's old enough that they are selvage, that's a good one to keep. That's a good one to watch for. And the value is going to be much higher for a selvage pair of vintage Levi's than it will be for those post 85, which are going to have a different style of end on. So let me show you this. So after 1985, you'll see this. They used what's called overlock stitching, and that was to keep the edge from unraveling. You can see the fray, okay, the raw edge of that, hopefully in the camera. If not, I'll try to put a picture up. So that's post 1985. Now this is still this particular pair I was holding up is a pair of vintage Levi's, and it's from the 80s, I believe. These are like late 80s, but these are still really good made, and they're still heavier denim than what you get today, still 100% cotton, but again, they don't have selvage denim. Now selvage is still made. I'll say this, just because you see selvage doesn't mean that it is 100% going to be like an authentic vintage pair of Levi's, though it could be an authentic pair of Levi's, because Japan still makes cotton the old way, using the old shuttles, the old manufacturing methods, and it's selvage denim. And so Levi's Premium, the Levi's Premium brand, and this is through Levi's, they still make selvage denim Levi's, and that's pretty cool. You know, you can get modern versions of them, but they're also really expensive. All right, next thing you need to look for, so part number 2. So first the material, then the tabs. So when we refer to the tabs, we're talking about the item that is stitched onto the pocket. Now this is going to be an interesting one here that we'll talk about in a moment, but everybody's familiar with the iconic red tab. This is a pair of modern 501s, and you'll see the red tab here that they use on the pocket, but you also probably noticed something missing. We'll talk about that in a minute. Now, there's 2 styles of red tab, and the red tab's the first one that we're discussing. So there's the big E and the little E, and I told you we're going to focus more on Levi's from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So let me keep this brief. Before 1971, okay, pre-1971, Levi's had a big E. In other words, it was all capitals, capital L-E-V-I-S on the red tab. Now, I don't currently have a pair of big E Levi's because they're really hard to find. I have found big E items before, but I don't find them very often. I mean, that's one of those, you know, holy grail items when you find big E stuff. So again, pre-1971, it would have had a capital letter E on the red tab. Over 50 years old if you find those. They're definitely 50 years old. And then you got to look at a lot of other factors to start trying to narrow down the date. Stitching, zippers, there's all kinds of different things, and we'll talk about some of that maybe in a minute. But we're going to keep 2 modern ones. So the next thing is the little E, and you probably can't really see that in the camera, but maybe I can blow it up for you. If not, I'll put a picture in there. So the little E is what they went to in 1971. Now let me say this, okay? They were not used until 1971. You may actually find a few big E after 1971, and some will argue with me on that, but here's what happens. Okay, so factories, there were many Levi's factories, right, making Levi's products, Levi's jeans across the country. And so there were, you know, still big E tabs that were left. And so factories that were using those up, even though there were no more ordered after 1971, it is absolutely possible that some of them, and even proven that they leaked over into the next year, possibly a year after that at some places, depending on what was being manufactured, what facility, and all that. So we will see a few bleed over, but beginning in 1971, all the new tabs being made and supplied to the factories were with a little E. Now this also coincides with some other changes that were taking place in that same era of time that we'll talk about in a moment. So here's the cool thing though about little E. It's just because it's a little E, lowercase e, right, in Levi's, does not mean that it's not vintage. In fact, Levi's with the lowercase e at this point in history can still be 50 years old. I mean, think about that. They can still be from the early 70s, and this is 2024, headed for 2025, guys. So they're going to get more and more collectible, especially when you're able to date them as 1970s or 1980s pair. The ones that are older are going to have a higher value than the ones that are 90s or maybe early 2000s. So back to this red tab really quickly, just so you know what was going on with this. You notice that this one didn't have Levi's on it, and it just had an R. And I've heard some people say, you know, heard comments that, you know, oh, those are fakes or something like that. But the reality is this, that Levi's has had a lot of trouble over the years trying to protect its branding and its trademarks. Anything from the iconic stitching on the pocket to the red tab that says Levi's, or the red color of the tab itself. And so that's where that comes into play. So there's a certain percentage of Levi's every year that have to be produced with just an R on the tab to trademark and maintain their trademark rights for the red tab itself. Isn't that pretty cool? So if you find those, there's not near as many of those made. I think they estimate, I've seen lots of different estimates. So let's just say maybe 1 in 10 have the trademark without Levi's, about 10% or so. Maybe it's a little more than that, maybe it's a little less, but let's just throw it out there, somewhere in that range. The next tab I would say to watch for is the orange tab. Now you'll be able to see this in the camera. This is an orange tab pair of Levi's. Now the orange tabs were from, okay, so they began in 1969, and Levi's is very traditional. You know, they really stayed close to the vest. They had really strict standards on how to make the original Levi's, the 501s, right? The first kind of the really iconic jeans, and then some of those that came after them. But beginning in 1969, they started this trend, this fashion denim series that they put under the orange tab, and they allowed a lot more experimental designs. And this is where even some of those that carry red tabs today, this is where some of those originated from. They started out as orange tabs, whether it be bell bottoms, boot cut style jeans, just different styles that they developed, and they launched under this orange tab. So these originally would have been cheaper than the red tab jeans, okay? Cheaper than the standard Levi's, at least to a degree. But they catch on pretty quick, and today a lot of these are very collectible because, again, this tab goes all the way back to 1969. Now you're going to find that when they are that old, of course, right, they're going to have selvage denim. And again, I unfortunately do not have a pair of selvage right now. You will find selvage more often than you will find Big E. That is 100% fact, because there were several years of selvage denim manufacturing and use with Levi's that came after the Big E was no longer used. So watch out for those. But again, back to the orange tab. Most of these are probably going to be when you find them from the 70s and the 80s. However, they did make them up until 1999, and I think they're still doing some, like, you know, they do some short runs, and they say there's some others out there. The dates are really tough to nail down on some of these style changes and tabs things on Levi's, but from what I understand, it really kind of comes to a close for a while, at least at about 1999, which just tells me that if you find an orange tab, you're already looking at a pair of jeans that's at least 25 years old. That's going to be the minimum. And then it comes down to learning how to identify, using the care tag and some other things we'll talk about in a moment, how to identify the exact date of those Levi's. Now, all right, so the last tab that I want to show you is silver tab. And I'm not going to pull these all the way out of the plastic. I've got these currently listed, and these are actually cords, or corduroy, right? They did make jeans and corduroy. I had some silver tab jeans back in the 90s. I think every kid probably did. They were super popular. They were extra baggy. It was kind of like the sport culture, like street sports, right? And just street culture in general. So super baggy. It would be things like, you know, skateboarding and stuff like that that would be kind of associated with maybe this particular, the grunge style of dress back in the 90s. And so here it is. It's a silver tab, and I'm trying to keep it turned where you can see it, but you know, it is what it is. It's kind of turned. You know how that goes with Levi's. But that's it. What we would normally see is the 2-horse patch, but this is the silver tab patch. And there's different variations of the tabs, not the tab, but the different variations of the patch, different variations of the inside labels and stuff on silver tabs. But for right now, just know that if you find silver tabs, they were introduced around 1988 is when they were first kind of hit the scene, really popular throughout the 90s, and I can't find an exact date. I've searched and searched about silver tabs trying to get the history down. If you know the date that the last or the last year where they were made in the early 2000s. You can let me know in the comments. But it was the early 2000s when they stopped manufacturing of these. They brought them back briefly, reintroduced them in 2018, stopped again in 2020 and stopped. But in the fall of 2022, they re-released, is that how you say that? They did release these again, silver tab jeans, and they have been for sale. I don't know, as far as I know, they're still making them right now. For a couple of years, they've been making silver tabs. All right, so again, the material, the tabs, and also now the care tags. That's another important item to look at and look for when identifying whether or not a pair of Levi's are vintage. So let's talk about the tags. And a couple of things we need to know. First of all, the care tag was not introduced until July of 1972. Now, remember that it was around 71-ish, right, when we see no more big E red tabs being made. And so 1971, 1972, that's kind of, so basically what people have often said is when you see a care tag, you won't see a big E. But I will say this, because the old big E tabs were still being used up before the little E's were starting to be used in some factories, they do have some few examples of some overlap, okay, like 1972, 1973, really be 1973, I guess we'd say, because 1972, beginning in 72, Levi's actually used a stamp on the pocket rather than a care tag, but care instructions were required by law beginning in July of 1972. And so, beginning with the stamp, but sometime in 73, they began to insert an actual tag into the pants that had the instructions on it. Now, here's the thing, these early tags are made of a really papery material. I'll show you an example. So this is another pair of orange tabs. These are 517s. And here you can see in the back waist the care tag. Now sometimes this care tag is down inside of the pants. Sometimes it's down on the out seam under the pocket. Sometime in this area you'll find it on some of the older ones. So it starts out on the out seam, it works its way to the waist. This is one of the paper tags on the inside leg underneath the pocket. Paper tag, this is on a pair of 501s, okay? And again, this is a really papery type feel and material. It is woven, but it's just got a papery feel to it. They will eventually, after being washed many times, they can lose that. This is a pair from the 90s, I believe, based on the tag. I'm not going to go over how to read the tags today. We could do that in a future video. If you want me to, let me know in the comments. So a couple of things on this, the paper care tag. The move to the waist began, best I can understand, sometime during the 80s, okay? I don't know exactly when in the 80s, but sometime during the 80s, they began making this transition away from the inner leg and to the waistband for the paper care tag. One of the big things, though, to look for when you have these, and you might not be able to make it out on this one, but it does say right there, made in USA. And so made in USA is always going to be an indication that a pair of jeans are in fact vintage. And you'll also see made in USA on this tag as well. And something else you'll find is on the patch, the 2-horse patch, you'll see the same thing on this one. It is right there. It says made in USA. Also of note, beginning in 1994 and lasting until about 2005, the Levi's 501s used the cloth tag on the left. Other styles of Levi's continued to use the papery tag on the waistband until around 2003 when they switched to the cloth tag on the right. Now from 2005 on is where you're going to see those sets of 3 care tags. Like usually they're sewed together, sometimes there's some side by side on the modern versions. Let me show you what that looks like. Alright, so if you see a set of tags like this, as soon as you see these, you don't have to look any further. You know this is modern. It's a series of tags. Okay, they're really slick, super slick. They are like a cloth material, but like I said, they're super slick material, almost silky feeling. And those are going to be modern. These are going to be definitely after 2005. So you're looking at less than 20 years old on all of these. Although we're getting to the point where some of the early ones are going to at least meet the 20-year-old mark of vintage, though I don't think they're going to get a bump in the market value for a while. So how about a few more bonus tips really quick? You know you've got you can check the zipper sometimes to find out if they're vintage. How about that one? You probably didn't see that coming, right? Unless you're familiar with it already. So just like on other vintage clothing items, a very common zipper used by Levi's was Talon. So usually if you see a talon zipper at all on a garment, you got a good chance that it's vintage, but on Levi's, it's definitely going to be vintage. If you see a gripper zipper, or if you see it says gripper on it, it's older than the talon most likely. And there's some others that came before those. The more modern Levi's are mostly going to have a Levi's branded zipper. It's going to have Levi's on it, stamped on it. And with the exception being that sometimes you'll see a YKK, which is Japanese made, and I'm pretty sure they're the ones that make the zippers for Levi's today. So I'm sure what happens is sometimes if they ran out in the early 90s or late 90s of the Levi's branded zippers, then sometimes they might have been shipped some basic YKK versions to put in the pants until they could get more of the Levi's branded ones manufactured. Again, I told you this already, but if it says vintage, it's not vintage. It's most likely an LVC, Levi's vintage clothing line, and also Levi's premium. And those two lines do specialty runs of clothing. And so another bonus tip is know that just like I showed you on the silver tabs that were made in Guatemala, just because a pair of Levi's are not made in the United States does not mean that they're not vintage. In fact, Levi's has been outsourcing some of its work since the 1960s. You know, they had factories in Canada, they had them in the UK, in France, even into Asia. And so there's going to be some exceptions to this rule. And then, of course, as we move into the 90s, we get factories in Lesotho, factories in Egypt, factories in Colombia, because of the Central South America thing, Guatemala. And, you know, when you see those, there's a good chance it might not be vintage, but if it's a paper tag, it's probably vintage, right? All of the silky tags are not going to be vintage. But if you see a papery tag and it's got Egypt or Colombia or Lesotho or something like that on it, it's still technically going to be a vintage pair of Levi's. It's just not going to be probably as valuable as Made in USA, with exceptions like the silver tabs. So just keep that in mind. And in some cases, they can be quite old. So like a pair of Levi's made in Canada in the 60s, it's still going to be Big E, and that's still going to happen. That's all I got on vintage Levi's. I know it's been kind of scattered, smothered, and covered. Hey, I just stayed at Waffle House yesterday, right? So it's kind of, I guess it's still affecting me a little bit. I got my hash browns, by the way. I got them smothered. I got them chunked and diced. And sometimes I do other stuff, but that's how I got them this time. But anyway, let's move on to a little bit of what sold, and hopefully there'll be some things there that you'll find that you're not familiar with, and I can help you there as well to find new items to be looking for when you're hunting for that next bolo to make a good buck on. All right, so let's jump on into what sold. I have 10 items going out today for $401.98. The first sale I have today is another CD from my big buyout. This is the Bellamy Brothers, 40 years. Only $5 plus shipping, not a huge profit on that, but I'll take it. I mean, again, everything I'm selling at this point of those CDs is all profit, So that's a good thing. All right, next up, a vintage Reynolds hat. Of course, on the band, it says Made in USA on the snap part. And also here, Reynolds Made in USA. So maybe you can make that out in the camera. And so not hugely valuable, but you know, it's hard to pass up old snapbacks and these trucker hats. This one sold for $6 plus shipping. Oh yeah, sorry, I gave $1.99 for the hat, so I didn't really make much of anything on the hat. $1.99 into $6. I wouldn't suggest always buying those things. I just like them, that's why I get them. So this next item I picked up on our way back from Omaha when we went to Plains to Profit. This one sold for $7.50 plus shipping, and if you don't recognize these are Pyrex handles, and they're made to interlock and go under a dish, so they're kind of cool. If I can get them worked out here and show you, just like that right there. So they lock together and it adjusts depending on the size of the dish. You can make it bigger or smaller. And so it's just like a carrying handle attachment. I thought they were really cool. I figured they'd have more value. I honestly didn't look them up because anything Pyrex tends to sell pretty well. I think these were $2.99, but only sold these for $7.50 plus shipping. I think I had them listed for $10, and I took an offer. So those are going out the door, though. Not going to complain about it. Sometimes you take those chances based on your previous knowledge without looking up. I don't suggest doing a lot of blind buying, but you know, in the interest of being efficient while you're in a store or at a yard sale, guys, sometimes it's hard to just stand there and look up every single item. You are subtracting stops and subtracting time you can spend at other locations. and probably missing out on other items by not moving on faster. So, you know, once you have a knowledge built up, you know, try to trust your gut, trust the knowledge that you have. It can really help you out. And as long as you don't make too many impulse buys, I think you'll be okay. All right, so I apologize. I'm trying to keep where I have light on the items, but I don't have a glare in my glasses. And it's tricky, man, it's real tricky. So this next item I started to show you is a belt. And it is a Brighton belt. It is braided. I don't know how well you can tell that. Maybe a little bit there in the camera. You can kind of see it. So this is a vintage Brighton. You can tell by the wear on the buckle. It is a brass buckle. But anyway, this is a men's belt. It is a size 36, and this sold for $15 plus shipping. I don't remember. It's been a while since I bought this. I generally don't pay over about $2.99 or $3.99 for a belt unless it's going to sell pretty high. So generally on these, it's like under $5. So just to be safe, we can call it 5 into 15. It's an easy list, easy ship, easy to store. It's a small item. I don't mind those sales. All right, so our next item going out is another CD from our big buyout, our big Facebook CD buy. Now I've been selling off of this now for a few months, but I'm gonna be honest with you, I listed all of the box sets, all of the DVDs, and I listed A's and B's out of the CDs. I still got to list C through Z. I have so many CDs. I just got a little bit burnt out on listing music, so I've been listing other stuff as we hit, you know, garage sale season, but I'm gonna start mixing some of that back in. This total sale of value is going to be really, really high when it's all said and done. I've definitely made my money back and a lot of profit already. So this is all profit. And this CD, the Blues Project Anthology, is 2 discs, and this sold for $21.99 plus shipping. Really awesome CD there. Such good music in that collection that I bought. Next item, I got this just, honestly, I think last week. And I listed this fairly quickly just because it was at the top of the pile, I guess you could say. I brought it in and set it down in my listing area, and they're fragile, so I didn't want them sitting around for very long. And so you see this is from the Thomas Kincaid series called Freedoms in Fashion Collection. And this is, I think, probably, I don't know if it's put out by Hallmark or one of those type companies. I don't see a Hallmark on it. It says the Hamilton Collection. So I'm not familiar with these. I know Hallmark does a lot of these resin figurines and things like this, but again, Freedoms in Fashion, and this one's called the Rockets Red Glare. And I'll show you the bottom so you can get an idea what these look like if you ever run across them. This still sold for $25 plus shipping. And again, I gave $5 each for these. So I've got like $20 in 4 of them, and I expect them to sell collectively for around $90 to $100. So $20 into 90 or 100. I thought that was a pretty good profit margin. You're gonna have to be careful how I pack these though. Next item, I buy these a lot. If I see Weegens, I pick them up. So Bass in general may not be the best brand of shoe to buy, but if you find Bass Weegens, and I don't know if you can see it inside there, but it's usually it's printed right on the insole. And then sometimes it'll be on the bottom. On this pair, it is not. These are women's. You could tell they're a mule, and they're like a penny loafer in the front. So these I listed for, I think it was $35. I think it was $34.99, and I sold them for $25 plus shipping. So I had $4.99 in those, I think it was. I paid very little for them, sold them for 25 bucks. So this next item going out was from that estate sale. I just released a video showing you some of the items, and you know, they had quite a bit of vintage items. And so in the shop, they had it opened up, and they had a few tools left. There weren't many, but they had a few, and this one is a snap-on. You can see right there, Snap-on USA. And so this is a valve tool, and it's a V22. It's a valve adjustment tool. I think when I read about it, it's for a diesel. It might have been a Ford diesel. And from what I understand now, this was like 1957 was the date that this was made. Long story short, guys, this was an awesome pickup. I gave $1 for this, and I sold it for $50. That's the kind of sales you're trying to get. You know what I mean? So this next one is the only regular clothing item. Of course, I had the hat and shoes and the belt. Those all, I guess, technically relate to that. They're clothing accessories. You won't be able to tell much about this, but this is a Charles Tyrewit men's blazer, 42 regular. I did a lot of measurements, took really good pictures of this, and I put this up for, I think it was $59.99, and I sent an offer of 45 bucks, and I got my asking price. I gave $3 for this at my Honey Hole thrift store. So 3 into 45 for a blazer. If you find the right brands in men's blazers, they can do really well. I know some people are scared of them because of fit, but just take really good measurements. Now, I'm not saying do this for one that's 20 bucks because it's a little bit of a hassle to fold them up, store them sometimes. It's a hassle to get the measurements right. But if it's, you know, say $50 or more, or has the potential to be around $50 or more, which is where I had it listed, then I think it's definitely worth it if you're getting it for less than $10. And that's kind of where I tend to land on those. Now, my last item that I have going out is my best sell of this group. Let me slide these out of the plastic. This is a pair of Brooks that I picked up at Goodwill. Now, these are brand new. They were never worn, never used. And these are Brooks Run Merry. Now, they're the Levitate 6, but again, these are a holiday edition. I don't know how well you can see them in the camera, but they got snowflakes, like silver snowflakes woven into the white, and then it's got the buffalo print, buffalo plaid on the insides and in the strings. A really awesome looking pair of shoes. I had these listed up pretty high, I think about 140, 139. And of course, it's past Christmas season. They're sitting there. I figured, you know, I might not even be able to sell these again, possibly until Christmas or close to it again. But I got an offer for these at $100. And so I debated, because these have sold in new condition without a box for upwards of 120 or better. That's why I had them priced there. I debated on coming back at 120, but then I got to thinking about it. You know, would I want to lose the sale? I just didn't want to lose the sale over 20 bucks when I've only got $20 in them. 20 into 100 is good. 20 into 120 is better. But 20 into 100 right now versus having to keep them in storage, wait on another buyer to come along, it's the only offer I've received. And so if I had to wait all the way to say like November-ish, you know, to have someone that like, hey man, I want those Christmas shoes, you know, it wouldn't really be, I don't think, a wise decision. I don't think keeping them for that many more months just to shoot for 20 extra dollars that eBay's still going to take a cut out of, which would probably be like $15 I would get out of it, maybe. I mean, I just don't think it's worth it. So anyway, I let them go for $100. I think it was a good sale. And again, my total for those 10 items was just over $400. And, you know, 401 and 98 cents. So I think that's a pretty good little lot of sales. My sales overall have been a little bit slow. I know part of that's on me. I haven't listed as much as I should. I have been listing, but it's been a little more sporadic. I think I mentioned in previous videos that right now is a busy time for me. I'm really trying to double down on finishing the house that I'm building my mom. It's just a little small place. It's less than 1,000 square feet, but I've got a lot left to do. And so I'm spending a lot of my time out there. I've also got a huge yard that I have to take care of. It's over 3 acres that I mow and weed eat. And, you know, so I mean, that takes time. Everything takes time, you know, I mean, just life in general. But right now I've got a lot of extra responsibilities that I'm dealing with. And so, you know, I'm having to divide time. I'm having to work a lot late at night. And sometimes it gets to the time that I normally list and man, I'm just out of gas. I mean, I'm sitting there on the couch and I am absolutely spent and I just don't have the gumption to get up. I'm sitting there about to fall asleep. So I go to bed. And sometimes I miss a day of listing. And I know I tell y'all on this channel all the time, you got to list consistently. And I do believe that. And I'm trying to be full time with reselling. But right now I'm probably more in operation like a part-time reseller. I feel more like I'm dividing my time between multiple activities. And that's normal sometimes for us. But it won't be that way forever. I'm excited about getting some of this stuff finished and behind me so that I can devote a greater number of hours on the daily during the easier times to work to eBay only. And I'm excited about that because I think, you know, the sky may not be the limit. You know, I don't think it can grow endlessly for just one person doing it. But I do think I have a lot of room for growth in total revenue and definitely for growing in knowledge and becoming a better reseller as I continue to grow my business on eBay. So guys, thank y'all for hanging out with me today. I appreciate you as always. If you haven't already subscribed, I do ask that you go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, give me a thumbs up. Guys, leave a comment, give me any questions that you got, leave those at the bottom. And don't forget, we are having the Pickin The Plateau meetup in August, so that's going to be during the 127 highway sale. Look down in the description for a link to Eventbrite where you can find all the information you will need about tickets and the plans for the event. So guys, again, I appreciate you. Don't ever forget, I love you, God loves you. And whatever you do, guys, don't you ever give up. I'll see you on the next one.